Every rider knows there are parts of a motorcycle you never gamble with. That's why Harley's 2026 triple clamp situation caught so many riders off guard. What started as a routine recall quietly turned into something much stranger. A second recall involving motorcycles that had already been repaired. The same bikes, the same component, and a repair process that suddenly raised new questions. Today, we're walking through exactly how that happened, what riders are discovering now, and why this recall story refuses to stay buried. Stick around until the end, because this story explains how the fix itself became part of the problem. The recall that was supposed to be over. For most riders, the first sign of trouble arrived quietly. No dramatic headlines. No roadside failures making national news. Just a recall notice circulating through dealerships and rider forums. Harley had issued a safety recall affecting certain Sportster S motorcycles built between 2021 and 2026. The issue centered on a component most casual riders rarely think about, the upper triple clamp, the solid piece of metal holding the front forks and steering stem together. At first, the announcement sounded routine. Recalls happen in the motorcycle world, even among respected brands. Riders understand that machines built for speed, torque, and rough pavement occasionally reveal weaknesses after thousands of miles on the road. The notice explained that the clamp might fracture under certain conditions, potentially affecting steering stability. The solution seemed simple. Owners would bring their motorcycles to the dealership. Technicians would inspect the part and replace it if necessary. The story might have ended there, filed away with other routine safety notices. Yet, several months after that first repair program began, the same motorcycles quietly returned to the spotlight. Word spread through rider groups and service counters that the problem had not disappeared. In fact, the machines that had already been repaired were suddenly part of a new safety review. A recall that riders thought was complete had reopened. That unexpected turn pushed the conversation into new territory, setting the stage for the moment when the same motorcycles would be called back again. When the same bikes were called back again. Early in 2026, Harley issued another recall notice involving the same Sportster S model range. The announcement arrived with language that immediately caught riders' attention. The new recall did not only apply to motorcycles that had never been inspected. It also included machines that had already gone through the earlier repair process. Owners who believed their bikes had been fixed were suddenly told another inspection might be necessary. That detail raised eyebrows across the riding community. Recalls themselves are not unusual, but a recall that circles back to previously repaired. Motorcycles feels different. Riders who had already taken time off work, hauled their machines to the dealership, and waited for the first repair were now hearing the same message again. Another check. Another possibility that something inside the steering assembly needed attention. A second recall transforms a straightforward repair story into something more complicated. The issue was no longer limited to the original defect. It now involved the process that was supposed to correct it. When riders start wondering whether the fix itself might need fixing, confidence becomes harder to restore. That shift in perception pushed many riders to look more closely at the part sitting at the center of the controversy, the small but vital piece of metal connecting the entire front end of the motorcycle. If you're finding this breakdown useful, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Why the triple clamp matters more than most riders realize. To understand why this recall generated so much discussion, it helps to look at the component involved. The upper triple clamp sits at the top of the front suspension assembly. It links the fork tubes to the steering stem, forming a rigid bridge that keeps the front wheel pointed precisely where the rider intends. Without that solid connection, the front end of the motorcycle loses alignment, and steering precision begins to disappear. When a motorcycle moves through a corner, the forces acting on that clamp are enormous. The rider's weight shifts forward. The front suspension compresses. Road imperfections travel up the fork tubes with every bump and ripple in the pavement. All of that energy passes through the clamp before reaching the frame. Engineers designed the part to withstand those stresses for years, which is why it is usually built from strong forged metal and tested extensively before production. That mechanical reality explains why the recall quickly spread through conversation circles. Riders know which parts of a motorcycle truly matter, and steering components sit near the top of that list. Yet the engineering explanation alone does not explain why the story refused to fade away. Something inside the repair process had gone wrong, and that discovery would soon push the investigation beyond the part itself toward the chain of decisions that followed the first repair campaign. If you care about the details that keep riders safe, check the description for the gear and accessories linked below. The right riding setup is part of the bigger picture. The moment the repair itself raised questions. The turning point arrived when a dealership report revealed an unexpected detail about the earlier recall repairs. According to internal findings, some recall kits shipped to service departments contained an incorrect revision of the upper triple clamp. Instead of receiving the updated component designed to eliminate the defect, certain motorcycles may have been fitted with a part that did not fully meet the intended specification. That discovery forced Harley to look beyond the motorcycles already on the road. The company had to examine the inventory of repair kits sitting inside dealerships as well. Each box containing replacement components now required verification to confirm that the correct version had been installed or supplied. The investigation expanded rapidly, turning a limited recall into a broader review of both repaired motorcycles and the parts meant to fix them. Confidence can fade quickly when the remedy itself becomes uncertain. Riders depend on the idea that a recall repair restores the machine to full safety. When the repair chain comes under scrutiny, that reassurance begins to weaken. The investigation into those replacement kits opened a larger conversation about quality control, accountability, and how a repair process designed to solve a defect could instead deepen the mystery surrounding it. The scale of the problem. Once investigators began looking deeper into the recall situation, the numbers behind the problem started to emerge. Official safety filings revealed that roughly 8,498 motorcycles could potentially be affected. Those machines represented Sportster S models produced between 2021 and 2026, covering several production years rather than a single isolated batch. For a manufacturer, that kind of reach immediately changes the nature of the response. A problem involving only a few hundred motorcycles might remain a quiet service matter, handled discreetly through dealerships. A situation involving thousands spreads across owner groups, forums, and riding communities within days. The numbers did not stop with motorcycles already delivered to riders. More than 900 recall repair kits stored in dealership inventories also required inspection. Those kits contained replacement components that technicians used during the original repair campaign. If any of those parts turned out to be the incorrect revision, motorcycles that had already passed through service departments might still carry the unresolved issue. That possibility forced the investigation to expand beyond motorcycles on the road and into the supply chain that delivered the replacement parts themselves. Large recalls also have a way of drawing attention across the entire riding world. Even owners whose motorcycles are not involved begin paying closer attention when the number of affected machines climbs into the thousands. Conversations start in garages, during weekend rides, and in service waiting areas. Riders compare notes, asking whether friends or fellow club members received recall notices. As those conversations spread, the scope of the problem becomes part of the story itself. The growing scale of the investigation naturally leads to another question that riders began asking soon afterward. Had there been warning signs before the second recall appeared? Warning signs. Before the second recall, looking back through earlier reports reveals that the issue did not appear suddenly. Before the second recall announcement, Harley had already received several field reports involving damaged upper triple clamps. In those reports, riders described cracks or fractures forming in the component responsible for holding the front suspension together. while the number of reports remained relatively small compared with the total population of motorcycles produced. The nature of the problem made each report significant. Steering components carry tremendous loads during normal riding, and any structural weakness in that area demands careful investigation. Among those early cases, at least one incident involved a rider experiencing a crash connected to the fractured component. The injuries reported were minor, but the event still carried weight within the investigation process. Safety authorities treat crashes differently from routine service complaints because they demonstrate that a mechanical issue has moved beyond theory into real-world consequences. Once a defect contributes to an accident, even a small one, manufacturers must examine the design and manufacturing process closely. However, once questions surfaced about the repair kits themselves, those earlier warning signs took on new meaning. The field reports no longer represented isolated incidents from the past. Instead, they became part of a larger timeline showing how the issue developed from the first crack, discovered in a component, to a nationwide recall effort. Riders examining that timeline began to recognize that the problem had never been hypothetical. The fractures reported by early owners had already proven that the risk could appear in everyday riding conditions. That realization leads naturally to a deeper question about the industry itself and why a recall returning for a second round remains such a rare and complicated situation. Why a recall of a recall is so unusual. Recalls occur regularly in the motorcycle industry, particularly as modern machines become more complex. Manufacturers issue notices for issues involving sensors, electronic control modules, braking systems, and a wide variety of mechanical components. In most situations, the process follows a familiar pattern. Engineers identify a defect, the company announces a recall, and dealerships perform repairs or install updated parts to resolve the issue. After the repair campaign finishes, the affected motorcycles return to normal service, and the story fades from view. What makes a recall of a recall unusual is that the repair itself becomes part of the investigation. When the component installed during the first campaign comes under suspicion, the repair process no longer represents a clear solution. Instead, it becomes another variable requiring examination. For riders who already made the trip to a dealership and believed their motorcycle had been fixed, hearing that the repair might need inspection again creates understandable frustration. Within the riding community, that distinction matters. Riders understand that machines built for performance occasionally reveal defects. Mechanical systems contain thousands of components working under stress, and occasional failures are part of the engineering landscape. What proves harder to overlook is uncertainty surrounding the repair process itself. A defect may be forgiven once it is corrected. A repair that requires correction of its own introduces a new layer of doubt. Those doubts eventually reach the places where riders interact most directly with the manufacturer, the dealership service departments, responsible for carrying out the recall work. The dealer reality behind the recall. Inside dealerships, recall campaigns transform ordinary service schedules into logistical puzzles. Service managers must coordinate inspection appointments, order replacement components, and ensure that technicians follow precise procedures during each repair. When the recall involves a critical steering component, the responsibility becomes even more significant. Technicians must carefully examine the front suspension assembly, confirm whether the installed clamp matches the correct specification, and document every step for safety records. A second recall dramatically increases that workload. Motorcycles that have already passed through the service department return for another inspection. Owners who previously believed their machines were repaired now schedule new appointments, often asking questions about why the problem resurfaced. Each visit requires technicians to review service history, verify part numbers, and confirm that the correct component is installed. The process consumes time that service departments normally devote to routine maintenance and other repairs. Perhaps the most difficult part of the situation involves communication with riders. Service advisors often find themselves explaining issues they did not create and decisions they did not make. Riders arriving at the counter want clear answers about whether their motorcycles remain safe to ride and whether the earlier repair solved the problem. The tone of those conversations can shape how riders perceive the brand long after the recall itself is completed. From the service desk perspective, the recall is not only a technical matter, it becomes a daily conversation about trust between the manufacturer, the dealership, and the riders, who depend on both. How riders are reacting. When news of the second recall began circulating, the response from the riding community appeared almost immediately. Motorcycle riders rarely wait for official press conferences before forming opinions. Conversations begin in garages, dealership waiting rooms, online forums, and weekend ride meetups. Word spreads through riding groups faster than many companies expect. Once the story reached those spaces, riders began comparing experiences, discussing the recall notices they received, and asking one simple question: why had the same motorcycles returned to the recall list again? The reaction followed a pattern familiar to anyone who has spent time around motorcycle communities. Some riders responded calmly, pointing out that recalls are not uncommon in modern manufacturing. They argued that complex machines sometimes reveal weaknesses only after thousands of miles of real-world use. In their view, a recall simply shows that the manufacturer is addressing a problem rather than ignoring it. These riders tended to approach the situation with patience, willing to schedule another inspection and wait for the official solution. Steering stability sits at the center of riding confidence. Every mile on the road depends on the rider's belief that the front wheel will respond exactly as expected. Even the suggestion that a structural part of the steering assembly might fail can shake that confidence. Riders may continue riding while waiting for inspection appointments. Yet the thought lingers in the back of the mind during every turn and every uneven stretch of pavement. Observing how riders respond to that lingering uncertainty naturally leads to another question about the everyday consequences owners now face. The practical impact on owners. For many owners, the consequences of the second recall begin with a familiar inconvenience: another visit to the dealership. Riders who had already completed the first repair process now must schedule a second inspection appointment. That means arranging transportation, setting aside time during the work week, and preparing to leave the motorcycle with a technician who will examine the steering assembly again. What once appeared to be a resolved issue suddenly returns to the service calendar. Each appointment also brings a period of waiting. After checking the motorcycle in at the dealership, riders must allow technicians time to inspect the component and confirm whether the correct part is installed. Some inspections take only a short time, while others require additional parts or follow-up repairs. During that period, the owner may have limited access to the motorcycle, which can disrupt plans for commuting, weekend rides, or long-distance travel. For riders who rely on their motorcycles as regular transportation, that downtime carries real consequences. Mechanical issues may be repaired quickly, but memories of inconvenience remain longer. Riders remember the time spent arranging service visits and the uncertainty about whether the problem could appear again later. Those memories shape future conversations whenever recalls are discussed within the community. Once riders begin sharing those experiences, the story travels far beyond individual service appointments, eventually shaping how the brand itself is discussed among riders. If you want more clear, fact-based motorcycle stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. New investigations and rider-focused breakdowns are coming regularly, and subscribing ensures you won't miss the next story that riders everywhere are talking about. How reputation travels in the riding world. Motorcycle culture has always relied heavily on word of mouth. Riders trust stories shared by other riders more than polished advertising campaigns. A single conversation during a weekend ride can travel across dozens of riding groups within weeks. When a story about reliability or safety captures attention, it quickly becomes part of the community's shared knowledge. The triple clamp recall has followed that familiar path through the riding world. At rallies, coffee stops, and online discussion boards, riders repeat the same explanation in their own words. They describe the original recall, the dealership visit, and the moment when the second recall appeared months later. Each retelling adds small details drawn from personal experience, but the core message remains consistent. Riders remember the situation not as a technical report, but as a simple story about a repair that did not fully close the case. Managing that kind of narrative becomes difficult for any manufacturer, even if the technical solution ultimately resolves the issue completely. The story continues circulating long after the repair campaign ends. Riders remember the phrase and repeat it whenever recalls become a topic of conversation. The persistence of that narrative naturally leads riders to examine the deeper question behind the story. How did the situation develop in the first place? The accountability question. Whenever a recall story grows beyond technical reports and enters everyday conversation, riders begin asking deeper questions about responsibility. The second recall involving the triple clamp has prompted exactly that kind of discussion. Riders want to understand how a repair campaign designed to correct a defect could later require its own review. That curiosity reflects the mindset common among experienced riders, who maintain their own machines and understand how mechanical systems depend on careful oversight. Several possibilities circulate in those conversations. Some riders speculate that the original defect might have originated during manufacturing, perhaps from a material weakness or a machining issue affecting certain batches of components. Others suggest that the issue could involve a supplier responsible for producing the part. In modern manufacturing, many components arrive from specialized suppliers rather than a single factory, and errors in that chain can travel quickly through production lines. Official safety filings rarely reveal every internal detail of an investigation, leaving some questions unanswered. Even so, the existence of a second recall indicates that something in the original process did not function as intended. Riders who spend time maintaining their motorcycles understand how easily small oversights can grow into larger problems when they involve structural components. For them, the lesson is straightforward. Reliability begins with accountability at every stage of manufacturing and repair. The market ripple effect. When a recall story grows beyond service bulletins and reaches everyday conversation, the effects rarely remain confined to the motorcycles directly involved. Motorcycle markets react quickly to news that touches reliability or safety. Buyers, considering a new motorcycle, often compare several brands before making a decision, weighing reputation, performance, long-term durability, and the confidence that comes from owning a machine with a strong track record. News about a structural recall can suddenly enter that decision process. In situations like the triple clamp investigation, the ripple effect begins quietly. Potential buyers reading headlines or watching discussions among riders may pause before finalizing a purchase. Someone planning to visit a dealership that weekend might decide to wait a few weeks for more clarity. Others may start researching alternative models, simply to understand what options exist if uncertainty remains around a particular component or design. None of these reactions require panic. They represent the natural caution of riders who understand that a motorcycle is both a passion and a significant investment. Manufacturers know ripple effects travel fast. Even a limited recall can shape perception beyond the number of motorcycles involved. Companies respond carefully to show control and transparency. Yet such news also pushes riders to examine how modern motorcycles are built and managed. What this reveals about modern manufacturing. Looking beyond the immediate recall reveals something important about how motorcycles are produced today. Modern manufacturing relies on a network of specialized suppliers rather than a single factory, producing every component in isolation. Frames, suspension components, braking systems, electronics, and dozens of other parts often originate from different companies, each focused on its own area of expertise. This system allows manufacturers to combine advanced engineering with efficient production, creating motorcycles that perform at remarkable levels compared with machines from earlier decades. That efficiency, however, depends on careful coordination throughout the supply chain. Each supplier must produce parts that meet exact specifications, and every revision must reach the assembly line and dealership network without confusion. When a design update or material change occurs, that information travels through documentation, packaging, and distribution channels before reaching technicians responsible for installing the part. A small misunderstanding in that chain can allow the wrong component revision to appear where it should not. In earlier decades, motorcycles came from smaller supplier networks, sometimes within one facility. Modern production is highly interconnected, allowing efficient manufacturing, but also letting mistakes spread quickly. That reality explains why a single component recall can spark wider questions about engineering and repair. Why heritage brands face higher expectations. Motorcycle manufacturers with long histories often carry a different burden when problems appear. Heritage brands represent decades of engineering, racing victories, and unforgettable machines that shaped entire generations of riders. Riders who grew up hearing those engines or riding those models often develop emotional connections to the brand's legacy. That connection raises expectations for every motorcycle that follows. Many riders remember earlier machines that accumulated enormous mileage with relatively simple maintenance. Stories circulate about engines running for years, with little more than regular oil changes, careful riding habits, and the occasional mechanical adjustment. Whether every story is perfectly accurate matters less than the feeling those stories create. They establish a belief that certain brands built motorcycles capable of enduring the harshest roads and the longest journeys without hesitation. That contrast does not necessarily reflect declining engineering. Modern motorcycles use advanced materials, tighter tolerances, and sophisticated systems. Yet heritage brands represent tradition and continuity. When a recall appears, riders see it not just as technical trouble, but as a test. The lesson riders take from stories like this. Stories involving recalls rarely end with the final repair order leaving a dealership service desk. Even after inspections conclude and replacement parts reach motorcycles across the country, the conversation continues among riders who followed the situation from the beginning. Experienced riders understand that every mechanical system carries the possibility of failure. Motorcycles operate under heavy loads, high temperatures, and constant vibration, making occasional defects almost inevitable. A recall's lasting impression depends on how the situation unfolds. Riders watch closely how quickly problems are acknowledged, how clearly information is communicated, and how thoroughly repairs resolve the issue. When safety components return to the recall list more than once, the story lingers. The triple clamp case reminds riders that control, reliability, and trust underpin every mile. Protecting those qualities demands careful attention from manufacturers, dealerships, and riders alike. Stories like this remind riders that every machine on the road depends on trust. When a safety recall returns for a second look, it raises questions that riders deserve clear answers to. The triple clamp situation shows how important it is to stay informed about the machines we ride and the repairs meant to keep them safe. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more real-world motorcycle investigations and rider-focused stories. And I'd like to hear from you. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments, because riders often see the details that the headlines miss.